Well, hi everyone, and welcome back to That OA Thing, where we discuss the latest issues from across the Ombudsman landscape. I'm Donal Galligan, Chief Executive of the Ombudsman Association, and today we have a very special episode to mark International Women's Day. Joining us to discuss women's health and female leadership in the Ombudsman sector is Margaret Kelly, who is both the Northern Ireland Public Service Ombudsman and the Chair of the Ombudsman Association. Welcome, Margaret. It's great to have you on.
Thank you, Donal. I'm delighted to be here.
Well, it's a pleasure. We're really happy that you're able to join us. To start off, let's talk a bit about leadership. The Ombudsman sector currently has some fantastic female leaders, including yourself. Could you highlight some of the inspiring women leading the way in our sector and maybe reflect on the wider picture of female representation in leadership roles?
So I think across these islands, so across the United Kingdom and Ireland, we are very lucky to have quite a significant number of women ombudsmen, and that is a change. We have the Scottish Public Services Ombudsman, the Welsh Public Services Ombudsman, myself, the Police Ombudsman for Northern Ireland. So we have quite a number of women in leadership positions. And of course, we have the president of the International Ombudsman Institute, Nachali Hernandez, who is the ombudsman in Mexico and who in fact will be in Belfast next month, speaking for us at a conference around asylum seekers and refugees. So I think there are lots of examples of women ombudsmen at the moment, and obviously ombudsmen hold their position for a limited tenure. So in general, we hold it for about 7 years. So you do get that change, and obviously at times you will have more representation than others. But nonetheless, it is the case that internationally, and actually particularly across Europe, the representation of women at ombudsman level is lower than we would like it to be. And it certainly isn't that kind of 50% representation that we would want to see. So there is really something for me that links to the accessibility of the office and the use of the office by the public, right across all aspects of the public, that it's really important to see an increase and an improvement around women ombudsmen and indeed women in senior leadership positions in both the public and the private sector. So this International Women's Day, it's part of why I wanted to reflect that we have seen improvements. It is better than it used to be, but we still have some way to go.
It's interesting, isn't it? I was just thinking as you were speaking there, because I've came into the sector longer ago than I care to mention, but I was thinking, around 2008, and there were some fantastic female leaders there. I worked for Anne Abraham, but thinking of people like Emily O'Reilly and Jane Martin as well, and many others. And of course, we're talking about the public sector, but our membership covers the private sector as well. And you think about the female leaders then and over the last 15 years. But as you say, that change, this goes up and down. It's not constant. And I just had a little thought there as well. This is maybe for another podcast, but the idea about not having the same kind of representation on continental Europe. And when we think about the different approaches in these islands, the Ombudsman sector is very much an alternative to the courts. And we welcome, lay leaders in that sense. Whereas on continental Europe, it's a much more legalistic approach. The ombudsmen there are often former judges or lawyers. I wonder if that's one of the issues as well that might explain the difference.
I think that does have a contribution to make. And of course, in Northern Ireland, we're very lucky at the moment. We have a lady Chief Justice, as indeed I believe you do in England.
We do.
So we have seen some movement in judicial roles, but we can still probably count in single numbers, in Northern Ireland in particular, the very senior judicial roles that are held by women. And I suppose I am very committed to the ombudsman role as an alternative access to justice. So we are not the same as the legal system. We provide an alternative route to justice on that I hope should be very accessible. And perhaps how that's developed across the UK and Ireland means that we have seen more of a shift, but it is certainly something I think might have an impact. But as you say, we have some amazing female leaders, including Emily O'Reilly and indeed Emily Logan in the south of Ireland, who is the Garda Síochána Commissioner. So there are women there. They're definitely trailblazing and leading the way, but always, I think, more to be done.
Yeah, absolutely. We were talking about Northern Ireland there, and one of the key areas your office deals with, of course, is health complaints. And there's growing recognition, isn't there, of the barriers that women face in having their concerns taken seriously. For example, chronic pain conditions like endometriosis, the impact of menopause, or accessing the right maternity care. Could you share some insights into the type of complaints your office has received in this area and perhaps what they might reveal about the challenges that women are facing?
Yeah, so my office gets around 1,300 complaints a year, and there's about 43 to 45% of them are health, so the biggest number. And for those complaints that we take through to full investigation, so our stage 3 investigation, which is approximately a year or more, 70 to 80% of them will be health. So a really significant issue. And it's really interesting because we've done quite a lot of work in the office looking at who complains to us and the different gender breakdown, age breakdown, ethnic minority breakdown. And one of the very interesting things for me is that women do tend to bring more complaints, but they also tend to bring them on behalf of other people. And I think that speaks to lots of the roles that women hold, and in particular the fact that women are much more likely to hold a caring role. And often women bring those complaints on behalf of an older parent who's perhaps been in a care home, and they bring it on behalf of a sibling, or they bring it on behalf of a child. So it's interesting to me how some of those threads around women's role feed right through into what we see in complaints. In terms of women's health, I think there has been quite a lot of work, and it's quite well recognised that there is a gender health gap. And I think lots of the BMJ and the different medical professions recognise that that health gap is there. So we do see, for example, when women go to A&E, their pain is likely to be triaged as lesser when compared to men. We do see that they are less likely then to get pain relief. We do see that women are more likely to live with autoimmune conditions. And while women will live longer than men, they are more likely to live with a disability. So that while they may have a longer life, the period of their life where they will be suffering a disability is higher. So I always say the Ombudsman's office is the tip of the iceberg. So it takes real determination, I think, to complain. And we already know from quite a number of surveys that particularly in healthcare, that the vast majority of people who suffer very poor service are unlikely to complain. So we start off there already. And even when people do complain, it takes real determination and perseverance, I think, to come through the complaints procedure and come all the way to the Ombudsman's office, which means if I see a trend, smaller trends can often be indicative of something more when you apply that to the larger population.
Absolutely.
So we decided for International Women's Day to have a look at the kind of health complaints that are actually coming to the office and the kind of themes that come through those health complaints. Now, at one level, there are some really common themes in there. So that women don't get the kind of information that they need to make really informed choices. A theme that I think applies regardless of the complainant is the need to listen. So the need to listen to women, and indeed any complainant, and the need to really improve communication as key to getting good outcomes for patients. The need to develop a learning culture that looks at what can I learn from this complaint? Is this complaint indicative of a bigger issue? So just to give you an example, we had a complaint that came to the office, and it was actually about a woman who had induced labour. And she really felt that the information that she was provided about that induction process and what that might mean in terms of her labour and her pain levels was not particularly clear. And in fact, she had a very distressing experience. So she complained, and eventually she brought the case to us, and we took a really good look at it, and we decided that the information that she had been provided actually didn't reflect what that was likely to be like and the risks and issues associated with induction of labour. In response to the complaint, the Health Trust in Northern Ireland decided to go out and do a survey in its maternity unit who'd been induced and ask them about what that experience was like and whether or not what they received in terms of information and advice was sufficient. And in fact, the majority of women in that survey reflected what our complainant had said. So the trust picked that up in very good practice and a very good example of learning, actually worked with women to produce new information and a new video that they now use for women who are facing induction in labour to ensure that they have much clearer understanding and clearer choice. Because if you have that, then actually your experience of care is likely to be much better. So while women often find it hard to complain, people often find it hard to complain, there can be really positive outcomes from that.
What a great example as well of the trust approaching it with the right attitude and that open manner, as you say, to learn, to try and improve the service. I think we hear so much, don't we, about the need for a duty of candour on this side of the water, the Hillsborough law as it's been referred to. And here, what a great example where something has gone wrong and they're open to putting it right. You mentioned about maternity care, obviously, there in that example, and it does remain a major area of concern, particularly in the UK, with numerous recent reports highlighting systemic failings in care provision across these islands. Could you talk a little bit more about the scale of this issue based on the cases your office has investigated?
So I think maternity care has been a really significant issue, and I think there's been a number of systemic reports, certainly across the UK, that has raised some of the difficulties. We've recently had the REMFU report in Northern Ireland, which looked at the quality and the safety of our maternity care. And really safe maternity care is vitally important. And that found that across all of the indicators, across stillbirths, perinatal and neonatal deaths, that Northern Ireland, unfortunately, had some of the worst outcomes across the UK. And I think there's been a number of systemic reviews. So we've had the Ockenden reviews, and we've had the Kirkwood investigation that actually found, when they reviewed 202 cases where unfortunately children had died, in 48% of those, there was the possibility for a different outcome. And we do see some really serious failings in maternity care. I think we're all aware of some of the pressures. I think we're very much aware of the pressures around workforce issues. And unfortunately, where you have any kind of care that is under serious workforce pressure, then that does impact on patient safety. But I think there are other issues, and those go back to those same themes that we've seen. Those are issues about ensuring women are informed, ensuring women are listened to, and that healthcare professionals properly listen to women. We do have one very serious maternity care investigation that we will be issuing next week alongside our Women's Health Digest. And unfortunately, in this case, the baby sadly died. This woman had a number of very high-risk pregnancies where she was at risk of placenta abruption, and that was known. And she had gone in, was due an elective section in 2 days' time, and was complaining of pain. And unfortunately, that was not taken as seriously as it should have been. And when she complained again about very severe pain, that was not escalated for consultant review when it should have been. And unfortunately, by the time that was escalated, her baby had died. And that is obviously incredibly distressing. In fact, I don't think there are any words to describe what that distress must be. And the Trust's own serious adverse incident report found that most likely, had she been listened to and had that been escalated, that her baby could have been born alive. And I think those are the kinds of really serious feelings that mean we have to have change. We did find other feelings in that report, and unfortunately we found that some of the records in that investigation were inaccurate and did not actually reflect what had happened at the time. And again, those go back to those themes that we keep saying to health practitioners again and again and again: communication, which begins with listening, keeping accurate records, making sure that you're informing someone of their choices and the risks. But most of all, I think if you really want to change patient safety, and if you really want to change patient safety in maternity care, listening to women is vital. Having a fully resourced workforce is also vital, and it was the case that in that maternity unit on that night, they were significantly understaffed. So there is a complexity, but nonetheless, I think the expectation for that mother that she was listened to, particularly given her history, was not unrealistic, and that should not have happened. And obviously we are working with the trust, and in fact one of the things that we have done is ask the trust to do an audit of all those cases where there was significant and high risk, and of the outcomes on those cases. So we will look at it in a systemic way, and there is nothing we can do to change that situation. But the reason I think that people come to an ombudsman's office is that they are often seeking change for other people. So what that mother wants to know is that that same situation isn't going to happen to someone else. And I think that's why there's a real obligation and a duty on us as ombudsmen to look at those systemic learnings. And that is really part of what my office tries to do, is say, look, what people ask from us is try to ensure it doesn't happen again. So we do have a role around that systemic learning, and we do have a role, I think, in terms of the trust that the public put in us when they bring to us those really difficult and distressing issues, to do our utmost to try to ensure it doesn't happen again.
Yeah, it's really powerful. As you say, ombudsman offices, they don't just play a crucial role in holding public services to account. It absolutely is about driving systemic improvements. How do you see your office and the wider ombudsman community actually doing that? How can you actually influence change in areas like women's healthcare?
So, I mean, I think that's probably one of the most difficult things. And when I took up role, which is 4.5 years ago now, and I arrived in the office as the new ombudsman, and somebody asked me why I had taken up that role. And my answer to that, and my answer remains the same, which is to make a difference. But I also know that that takes time, it takes effort, it takes both a holding to account and a collaborative working. So you actually need to be able to do both to actually try to drive some change, and those changes don't happen overnight. So we do that in my office, and I think across Ombudsman's office, we more and more do that by pulling together the trends, by pulling together the systemic lessons. In Northern Ireland, we've held a number of major patient safety conferences to work with people around how do we really improve patient safety. But no one person and no one office can deliver on that. That has to be a collaborative and a shared approach. And part of my role in the office, and I think part of an ombudsman role, is to shine a light where something really needs to change, and then to try to follow up and hold to account what does happen. So, for example, we're working much more on compliance. So we are looking at, when we make those recommendations to healthcare providers, are they actually putting them in place? And we are really following up when we do systemic investigations, what has changed, and we now publish publicly what has changed. But I think everyone needs to have some sense of that change takes time, and it doesn't happen overnight, and it is an ongoing journey.
Yeah, well, it's really great to hear the approach you're taking there, being both ambitious and realistic at the same time, which you absolutely need if you're going to drive change, aren't you? So I think this is probably a good time to say to our listeners, if any of the issues that we discussed today in this episode kind of resonate with you, we do encourage you to engage with organizations that can provide support or guidance. And there's a list of some of those in the podcast description. So do please go there and have a look and seek the help and support that you deserve. Margaret, look, thanks for joining us today and for sharing all of the insights that you do have. Before we go, is there kind of one key takeaway you'd like to leave our listeners with?
So I think International Women's Day is a day of celebration. It's a day of celebration of what women do, of who they are, and of what they've achieved. And I think it's really important that we hold on to the celebration. And I think there has been loads of change. If you go back, I listened to Our Lady Chief Justice very recently at something who said 100 years ago, women wouldn't have been in the law, never mind Lady Chief Justice in Northern Ireland. Yeah. So there has been change. And I think we have to celebrate that change. But I think it is also the case that there is more change to come. So I suppose my message is, let's celebrate the change we have achieved. Let's keep focused on the change that we still need for all women and the diversity of women. And let's not lose any of those gains. And a very happy International Women's Day.
Yeah, that's a really, really hopeful point, as you say. That let's not forget the celebration. It is International Women's Day is a time to reflect, as you say, but also to take action. And I think as well to say to people out there, if you're in a position to advocate for change, to amplify women's voices or support improvements in public services or elsewhere, now's the time to do it. You mentioned, we should say again, that the Northern Ireland Public Service Ombudsman's report on maternity care will be published next week. So keep an eye out for that on their website and their social media channels. Margaret, thank you again for joining us. It's been great to have you on.
Thank you very much, Donal.
And as always, dear listeners, you can stay connected with us on LinkedIn, X, Instagram and Threads under Ombudsman Association. Don't forget to follow us on Spotify and YouTube for more episodes of That OA Thing. If you found today's discussion valuable, please do share it with your colleagues, and hopefully you'll join us again next time.